Welcome to your video lecture on the nervous system. Now, the nervous system is a name given to the collection of nerve cells that receive, transmit and respond to stimuli from the external and internal environments. Now, the nervous system has three main functions. It senses changes in the body or outside of the body, it analyses these changes, it stores information if necessary, and decides how to respond. And the third function is that it responds by creating muscle movement or by inducing a glandular secretion. Now, nerve cells are specialised to be able to transmit nerve impulses and are called neurons. There are two types. There is a sensory neuron and a motor neuron. The main structural difference between a sensory neuron and a motor neuron is the position of the cell body. Now, the sensory neurons transmit information received from the sensory organs, and they carry information about the internal or external stimulus, and these are also known as the afferent neurons. Now, looking at your motor neurons, they transmit information to the part of the body that has to respond to the sensory stimulus. They stimulate the muscle to contract or the gland to make its secretion. And now these are called the efferent neurons. Now, the dendrites receive the nerve impulses. The impulses are then carried along the long axon. Now, the axon terminal of one neuron contracts with the dendrites of another at a junction called a synapse. Now, a chemical neurotransmitter called a dopamine allows the nerve impulse to be transmitted across the synapse, so this allows the message to be conveyed. All components of the nervous system are made up of neurons. Now, the axon of a neuron is also referred as a nerve fibre. When nerve fibres occur in bundles surrounded by a protective covering, they are referred to as a nerve. A group of nerves are called cell bodies, and they are bound by a sheath, and it's referred to as a ganglion. Now, the nervous system as a whole consists of the central nervous system, the CNS, and the peripheral nervous system, the PNS. And we're going to look at the central nervous system first. Now, the central nervous system consists of the brain and the spinal cord. The central nervous system receives sensory information from all parts of the body. On receipt of this information, the CNS analyses this information. Thoughts, emotions, and memories are generated and stored. The CNS usually responds to nerve impulses by stimulating muscles or glands, so it creates an appropriate response to the original stimulus. The brain is the most highly developed part of the central nervous system and is protected by the skull. The brain is surrounded by three membranes known collectively as the meninges. You have cerebrospinal fluid, which exists between the inner two layers to protect and further give extra protection and nourish the brain. The brain is highly vascular. A vast network of arteries supplies the brain with blood. The main artery is the carotid, and the external and internal jugulars are the principal veins. You have 12 pairs of cranial nerves that originate from the brain. Most of them supply the sensory organs and the muscles in the head, but some do extend to other parts of the body. An example would be the 10th cranial nerve is the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve serves the larynx, the pharynx, the liver, the spleen, the lungs, the pancreas, the heart and the esophagus. So note that the cranial nerves are not part of the CNS. They are included in the peripheral nervous system, which we're going to go into in a bit more detail. The most prominent region of the brain is the cerebrum. It's the site of the functions such as vision, hearing, touch, smell, voluntary muscle activity, speech and memory. The cerebrum consists of two cerebral hemispheres joined by a band of nerve fibres. The outer layer of the hemisphere is known as grey matter, and this surrounds the inner white matter. Each cerebral hemisphere has four lobes. The frontal lobe, which is used in the planning and excretion of activities, sends messages through the efferent nerves to the muscles. It controls facial and neck muscles, voluntary eye movement and speech. The parietal lobe is used for sensory reception and perception. It receives information about touch, pressure, temperature and pain, and it's involved with memory. Now the occipital lobe receives visual information from the eyes, and the temporal lobe is associated with sensory perception, and it receives information from the ears. At the rear of the brain is called the cerebellum. This is partially hidden by the cerebral hemispheres. The cerebellum monitors the position of the limbs and the tension in the muscles. It controls your fine voluntary movements and posture by making any necessary adjustments to the messages sent out to the voluntary muscles by the cerebrum. The base of the brain extends into the spinal cord. The spinal cord is the long nerve tract. It runs from the base of the brain down through the vertebral column, and the spinal cord allows the brain to communicate to all areas of the body. It does this by using 31 pairs of spinal nerves. The 31 pairs of spinal nerves that originate from the spinal cord are not part of the central nervous system. They are part of the PNS, the peripheral nervous system. Now, the peripheral nervous system includes all components of the nervous system except the brain and the spinal cord. It includes a system of nerves originating at the cranial and spinal nerves that runs to all organs and peripheral regions of the body. It also incorporates the ganglia situated outside the brain and the spinal cord. Now, the system of nerves conveys sensory impulses that stimulate the processing by the central nervous system and then transmits the motor impulses to the muscles and the glands. Much of the peripheral nervous system is concerned with voluntary responses. However, the peripheral nervous system is also concerned with the body's main involuntary automatic responses to stimuli. The peripheral nervous system supplies the motor nerves to the smooth muscle of the internal organs, such as the heart and the glands. This part of the peripheral nervous system is called the autonomic nervous system, as it deals with the body's automatic responses. The autonomic nervous system comprises of the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. They both supply motor nerves to the smooth muscles of the internal organs, hearts and glands. The main difference is the responses that they actually generate. Let's start with the sympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system increases the heart rate, increases the respiratory rate, and increases the blood pressure. It also slows down digestion. The motor nerves of the sympathetic nervous system originate from the spinal nerves in the thoracic and lumbar regions. The nerve endings release noradrenaline that creates those fight or flight reactions. The medulla of the adrenals is supplied by the sympathetic fibres. These trigger the release of adrenaline into the blood, so it enhances the effect of this system. Now, your parasympathetic nervous system opposes the sympathetic nervous system. So the motor nerves of the parasympathetic nervous system originate from the cranial nerves and a few of the spinal nerves in the sacral region. The nerve endings releases your acetylcholine, which decreases the heart rate, decreases the respiratory rate and blood pressure, and promotes digestion. Each organ receives input from both the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system, and the response created depends on the relative stimulation received from each. The autonomic nervous system that also incorporates the solar plexus. Now, the solar plexus is a network of nerves that's located behind the stomach. It supplies nerves to the abdominal organs below the diaphragm and regulates the functions of these organs. When emotional, stressed or shocked, the solar plexus may give rise to the feeling of nausea stemming from the stomach. You will be looking at the nervous system diseases and disorders in your work packs.